The moment Prince Harry opened his mouth on national television, something inside the British monarchy cracked, not quietly, not politely, but like glass shattering across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace. Because this wasn't another emotional royal complaint. This wasn't another recycled grievance. This was something far more dangerous. Harry arrived with receipts, timelines, and a story so explosive it dragged the ghost of Princess Diana back into the center of the royal stage. And suddenly, the question hanging in the air wasn't whether the royal family was divided. It was whether one woman had spent 30 years rewriting history to become queen. London woke up on March 4th, 2026 to something the palace has spent decades trying to avoid: a full-blown royal war broadcast in real time. Because less than 24 hours earlier, during a quiet 6-minute sit-down in Montecito, Prince Harry detonated what he called the Camilla dossier, a name that instantly sent shockwaves through royal circles. Not gossip, not speculation, a dossier. And inside it, a chilling claim that Queen Camilla had quietly orchestrated a 30-year campaign to dismantle Princess Diana's reputation so she could secure the crown. For decades, the story was simple. Diana was unstable. Diana was emotional. Diana was difficult. That narrative had been repeated so many times that it hardened into royal folklore. But Harry claims something very different happened behind the palace walls. According to him, the narrative wasn't natural. It was engineered. He alleged that between 1994 and 1997, Camilla Parker Bowles maintained direct encrypted contact with multiple tabloid editors, strategically feeding them stories that painted Diana as unstable. Each article, Harry suggested, wasn't random scandal. It was part of a pattern, a strategy, a siege. And when Harry looked directly into the camera during the CBS interview, he didn't soften his words. She wasn't just the third person in the marriage, he said. She was the architect of the media war against my mother. The line landed like a thunderclap. Inside Buckingham Palace, panic reportedly followed within minutes. At 10:15 a.m. the next morning, the palace issued something it almost never releases: a level 1 institutional rebuttal. That alone was shocking. For years, the monarchy survived scandal by doing the same thing every time: say nothing, let the storm pass, pretend dignity equals silence. But this time, the silence shattered. The official palace statement called Harry's allegations malicious fabrications designed to destabilize the monarchy. Yet something about the wording felt different. The language was colder than usual. Not a word about family, not a word about love, only duty, only service. And to royal watchers, that subtle shift revealed something deeper. This was no longer a family disagreement. The palace was treating Prince Harry like an external threat. But while lawyers drafted statements and aides whispered through palace corridors, the real drama unfolded on the streets of London, where Queen Camilla stepped into the public eye just hours after the accusations exploded. She was scheduled to attend a literacy charity event. Normally, these engagements are calm, predictable, carefully controlled moments where polite applause greets royal arrivals. This time, it felt like walking into a battlefield, because when Camilla stepped out of her car, the atmosphere was completely different. Cameras flashed wildly, reporters pushed forward, microphones appeared from every direction, and then the questions began. Not polite questions, aggressive ones. Did you trade Prince Harry's childhood for the crown? Did you help destroy Princess Diana's reputation? For 2 decades, Camilla had perfected the art of royal composure, the carefully practiced smile, the steady posture, the ability to glide through scandal untouched. But observers noticed something unusual that morning. For just a moment, the mask slipped. Her response lasted barely 2 seconds. "We continue our work with dedication as always." Then she moved away from the cameras. But the damage was already done. Across newsrooms in Britain, editors were suddenly reopening digital archives from the 1990s. Old headlines about Diana's mental health were being cross-referenced with the timeline Harry had described, and something unsettling began to appear. Patterns, dates, meetings. Harry claimed that internal highgrove records showed that 62% of negative media stories about Diana were published shortly after private meetings between Camilla and royal press officials. If true, it would mean the narrative that haunted Diana's final years wasn't just media cruelty, it was strategy. Even more explosive were the so-called highgrove logs released by Harry's legal team in California. These documents allegedly tracked Camilla's private social calendar from 1994 to 1996, mapping her movements against specific tabloid leaks. And one entry stood out like a flashing warning light: October 14, 1995. According to the logs, Camilla attended a 3-hour private meeting at a secluded house in Wiltshire with a senior media consultant. Days later, multiple newspapers ran coordinated stories questioning Diana's mental stability as a mother. Coincidence? Harry doesn't think so. Every time my mother gained public sympathy, he said, another story would appear describing describing her as unstable. Then came the accusation that truly shook the palace. Harry claimed Camilla pushed aggressively behind the scenes to strip Diana of Her Royal Highness title during the 1996 divorce, not for constitutional reasons, but to eliminate her rival's symbolic power. She wanted the ghost gone, Harry told Anderson Cooper, and suddenly the past began bleeding into the present, because the monarchy thought it had buried the Diana era decades ago. Instead, Harry had reopened the entire chapter with documents, timestamps, and a narrative that felt disturbingly plausible. By late afternoon, the numbers began reflecting the damage. A YouGov flash poll showed public support for Queen Camilla dropping 12% in less than 24 hours. Among people under 40, more than half believed Harry's claims could be true. In the United States, the reaction was even stronger. Nearly 70% sided with Harry. And inside Buckingham Palace, something even more alarming was unfolding. King Charles III, the one man expected to defend his wife, was nowhere to be found. He was attending engagements in Scotland that day. When reporters tried asking about the accusations, witnesses say the king froze for several seconds before turning away and leaving aides to handle the questions. No passionate defense, no emotional statement, just distance. And that silence triggered an entirely new wave of speculation, because if the king wasn't willing to defend Camilla publicly, what exactly did he know? Meanwhile, Prince William was doing something even more mysterious. Nothing. Appearing at a mental health event in Manchester, William remained completely silent about the scandal. No denial, no defense, no criticism of Harry, just calm, almost unsettling calm. Royal analysts believe the silence isn't accidental, it's strategic, because while Charles appears flustered and Camilla finds herself under global scrutiny, William stands untouched, the future king watching the chaos from a distance. And if the allegations inside Harry's dossier continue to unravel the past, the real question might not be whether Camilla survives the scandal. The real question might be who emerges from the wreckage of the House of Windsor. Because by the evening of March 4th, the monarchy wasn't just facing a family feud. It was staring at something far more dangerous, an audit of its own history. And once the past starts talking, it rarely stops. The night of March 4th didn't calm the storm. It supercharged it. Because while the palace hoped the scandal would cool down after sunset, the opposite happened. The story grew teeth. The narrative sharpened. And by the time midnight crept across London, it felt less like a family dispute and more like a public trial unfolding in front of the entire world. Newsrooms were no longer simply reporting Harry's claims. They were investigating them. The moment the CBS interview finished airing, investigative teams across Britain and the United States began digging through decades of archives. Old newspaper editions, private correspondences, forgotten palace memos. Journalists were comparing everything against the timeline Harry had just released. And the deeper they looked, the more uncomfortable the patterns became. The internet exploded with resurfaced headlines from the mid-1990s. Stories that had once painted Princess Diana as paranoid, unstable, emotionally volatile. Headlines many people had forgotten were now appearing side by side with Harry's newly revealed timestamps. And suddenly, those headlines looked different. Less like journalism, more like ammunition. Within hours, digital outlets began performing something unprecedented, algorithmic cross-matching of Harry's highgrove logs with historical press coverage. The technology allowed analysts to align Diana-related scandals with Camilla's known social schedule from the same era. The results were deeply unsettling. Out of 12 major negative media leaks Harry referenced, 9 corresponded almost perfectly with days Camilla had documented contact with royal press liaisons. 9. That number raced through social media like wildfire. Suddenly, the story was no longer just Harry's word against the palace. Now there were data points, patterns, correlations that were impossible to ignore, and the media smelled blood. By 6:15 p.m., the international press had entered what some commentators called total pressing mode. Television panels were debating whether the monarchy had quietly weaponized tabloids against its most beloved princess. Podcasts began replaying Diana's old interviews with a new lens. Every tear, every moment of vulnerability from the 1990s suddenly looked different. What if those breakdowns weren't simply personal struggles? What if they were the consequences of a coordinated media siege? As the debate intensified, reporters began pursuing a second thread inside Harry's allegations, the issue of money, because buried inside the Camilla dossier was a claim that could shift the entire scandal from emotional drama to financial misconduct. Harry alleged that during the mid-1990s, payments connected to the Duchy of Cornwall were used to fund outside public relations operations designed to protect Camilla's reputation while damaging Diana's. The Duchy of Cornwall isn't just a private account. account. It's a semi-public financial institution historically controlled by the Prince of Wales, which means today it belongs to Prince William. That detail changed everything, because if Harry's allegations were true, it meant funds linked to the future king may have once been used to manipulate public opinion against his own mother. And suddenly, William's silence didn't look passive anymore. It looked calculating. At approximately 4:30 p.m., sources inside royal financial circles reported that William's legal advisors had quietly initiated a sovereign audit of the Duchy of Cornwall's historical ledgers, a review stretching back 30 years. No announcement, no press conference, just accountants and lawyers opening financial records that many believed had been buried forever. Inside Kensington Palace, aides described the atmosphere as cold and procedural. William wasn't defending Camilla, but he also wasn't supporting Harry publicly. He was doing something far more dangerous. He was waiting, because if the audit confirmed Harry's claims, the consequences wouldn't stop at embarrassment. It would trigger questions about misuse of royal funds, historical corruption, and the legitimacy of Camilla's rise within the monarchy. Meanwhile, the pressure on Camilla intensified by the hour. Her literacy charity event had ended, but the images captured outside the building refused to fade. That brief moment, the trembling hand adjusting her coat, the hurried retreat into the state vehicle, replayed across television screens around the world. The narrative had shifted. For years, Camilla's image had been carefully rehabilitated. Patient charity work, quiet dedication. A slow transformation from controversial mistress into respectable queen consort. But now, the media was reopening the darkest chapters of the 1990s. Headlines once buried in dusty archives returned to the front pages. The woman who would be queen at any cost. The phrase spread like wildfire online. Millions of social media users were sharing the headline beside Harry's accusations. Memes appeared. Commentary threads exploded. Within 6 hours, the phrases Camilla 1996 and Diana's ghost generated more than 4 million mentions online. It was as if history itself had been resurrected. On the other side stood the King's office, led by Private Secretary Sir Clive Alderton, insisting on maintaining the monarchy's traditional response, dignified silence, and the familiar phrase recollections may vary. The two strategies were completely incompatible. One required confrontation, the other required avoidance. And as midnight approached, whispers began leaking into the press that Camilla was considering something unprecedented, a unilateral statement. In royal terms, that is almost unthinkable. The king and queen normally act as a single institutional voice. But Camilla's advisors reportedly feared that if she remained silent while the audit proceeded, the narrative would solidify against her forever. So the idea emerged, a broadcast, an independent message directly addressing the allegations. If she spoke without the king's approval, it would signal something extraordinary. Two courts operating inside the same monarchy. War inside the House of Windsor. The media instantly seized on the possibility. Newspapers began preparing emergency editions, speculating that the queen consort might speak alone. And as the palace lights dimmed that night, another silent player remained standing in the shadows. Prince William, who will still be standing when the final page is opened.